The CGA Tour, a podcast unlike any other. Now your host, Calvin Alexander.
Hello and welcome back to yet another episode of the CGA Tour podcast. I'm your host, Calvin Glenn Alexander, coming fresh off the cold here and joined by recurring guest of the podcast here and the man who does it all for pistolsfiringblog.com. Marshall Sky here, of course. So Marshall, thanks very much for coming on. Thanks for joining again.
Yeah, absolutely. Always a good time.
Well, first I want to start off here. Oklahoma State announced this past weekend, or I guess maybe Mike Gundy officially announced it, or just kind of however you want to say it. But April 19th, it will not just be the day of the Remember the 10 run this year. It will also be the third Saturday in April that has more activities going on. But as someone who has been supporter of the run and has been volunteering for the run since its inception, I would say please come join us for the Remember the 10 run this Saturday. Not this Saturday, but April 19th, the third Saturday in April, as it always is. And we'll hopefully see you guys all there. Links to sign up for the Remember the 10 run are down below in the description. And please let me know if you have any questions. Of course, with all that being said here, Marshall, what other news and notes did you take away from a 30-minute possible practice and signings that we're going to have on April 19th here for football?
Yeah. So first off, I've ran the run twice. I didn't. Let's see. 2023, I got married on the day of the run, so was unable to. As my phone alarm goes off, was unable to do that. And then last year, I think we were on an anniversary trip that weekend, so I didn't make it. But hopefully, I'm back into run. I'll have a excuse to be in Stillwater anyways. Obviously with Mike Gundy announcing, it sounds like maybe less of a spring game and more of a spring practice. I think for this specific team, it's probably definitely for the best, just because there's so many new people that they're trying to, get as many practices as possible. Didn't go into too much detail, but it's nice that after 2 years of not having, any sort of spring game, that there will be one. Gundy said that, kids will have opportunities before to get autographs, to get pictures, and after, whichever they choose. I think overall a net positive that Oklahoma State's doing something in the spring, and hopefully, in this new NIL world and all that, they'll be able to generate some sort of revenue from it.
Yeah, it seems like a great idea, especially as of, last week that there was an email that went out to all Oklahoma State fans or just kind of ticket holders, I guess the best way to say it here, of, hey, we're in this $20+ million push here for stuff. And also, I don't want to forget here, we also play Houston in baseball April 19th. Mm-hmm. That game time has not been announced yet, but a great weekend in Stillwater, so please come on out. And Marshall, for all you do, I'm assuming having your wedding in April and the third Saturday is probably good timing for you for all the things that you accomplished in life. So props to you there as well. But yeah, anything to kind of take away from that email here that was sent out like last week or 2 weeks ago regarding, hey, Chad Weiberg saying, hey, we are making a push here monetarily wise to try to really increase funding, did you take this kind of like, hey, we need to kind of step it up here, or we just need to do this to basically keep in stride?
Yeah, I think it was a more so of like, hey, this is what's happening. And I think he understands maybe, and I don't want to put words into his mouth, but understands, that football didn't go as planned last year. So maybe excitement is around, but it's very important for the university going into this revenue sharing model. That Oklahoma State is still making money, and through that, it's through football. That's just how sort of this works. So I think it was just him kind of underlining the importance of, hey, we get last year wasn't the year anybody wanted for football, but with this revenue sharing thing, you don't want to get behind. He mentioned, this is one of the more, revolutionizing parts of college athletics. He likened it to World War II and troops coming back after the end of World War II, and how some schools were kind of able to take advantage of that, and they were able to get ahead with that, and others have been trying to catch up since. So, I think it was sort of more of an underlining the importance of, hey, if you want, continued success at Oklahoma State, we get that last football season didn't go as planned, didn't go how anybody wanted it, but that this is still, it's important to keep revenue flowing whenever all of this is upcoming. So yeah, certainly I wrote it earlier this week. It's probably never a good time to have a bad season, but this past year with revenue sharing on the horizon, and sort of so much uncertainty there for those few weeks, I think this was a super awkward time to have a bad season, and I think Chad's just trying to get out ahead and say, hey, we get it. It didn't go as planned, but this is very much still important to the success at Oklahoma State that we keep some money flowing through here.
Yeah, it seems like that would be forefront on everyone's mind here right now, especially with everything going on as far as the roster cuts and size and kind of the comments that Gundy made last week as well, too, of, hey, we got to cut down from 140 to 105. And, really it just seems like that is a deal that is just more, hey, we don't know exactly when that's going to have to happen yet. And just reading through your article here this morning a little bit over the past couple of days, too, of, hey, it just seems like there's a lot of stuff that's going to be changing this offseason here, just in how things work. Can you go into more about that, of how that works?
Yeah, so it's all, decided through a judge signing something. So that process still has to take place. But everybody's anticipating that football rosters are going to be capped at 105 players. And then through that, with the revenue sharing, it looks like each school is going to have about $20 million to be able to delegate to their student athletes. That's just straight up revenue share. It's not technically NIL. So that's where the basis of this thing that needs to get signed in. Mike Gundy, I believe he said he had 142 players on the roster last year. So that obviously leads to a massive number of cuts. That's mainly your walk-on types, and he mentioned how difficult that was for him to kind of tell these kids who were paying their own way that, hey, this just isn't possible anymore. This is just not how college sports is going. And he said, we could complain about it, but this is just the way that it is at this point. So that's where that is. They're down to 105 on the roster right now, going into the spring roster. But there's going to be some more guys that get cut off that because there's high school kids that'll join in the summer. There's a couple more transfers that are finishing up at their old schools that'll be joining during the summer. There's a whole other portal window for the time being in April. So there, the roster is going to shift a little bit from the 105 that's on it, in the spring. And it's going to, it's probably going to be some of those. There's still some walk-on type guys that are on the roster. There'll probably be, those types of players that end up, going elsewhere, going to a lower level more than likely, as Oklahoma State kind of welcomes in the rest of its high school class.
Seems pretty interesting here overall that it basically, we're going to see what seems like an entirely new roster. Is there any way to figure out, hey, this spring practice may give us some hints and details here and there, or do you think this is just because the stadium's been renovated the past couple of years, right? Mm-hmm. So that's been the default of why there has not been a spring practice or so. But going into it, hey, if you're going to ask the fans for more money, probably we need to give the fans a little bit more back. That just kind of works out well, I would think. Do you think that there is an idea behind, hey, let's give the fans a little bit something back more as we ask for a little bit more money here, a little more capital up front, as I'm assuming season ticket prices are just going to keep going up and everything from that as well?
So I doubt we learned, just because this roster is so new, I doubt there's a whole lot that's said of, hey, this guy, it's looking like this guy's going to be starting during the spring. I bet, and I bet they'll somewhat have ideas about that type of stuff, but I just don't think that they'll tell us. Hopefully, if you're an Oklahoma State fan, you're hoping quarterbacks is situated probably by the end of the spring, just so Oklahoma State knows going into fall camp who that guy is. Are they going to share that news publicly? Probably not. I don't know. Maybe they will, but it just seems, historically speaking, they probably won't. But if you're an Oklahoma State fan, you're just hoping that, even if they don't share that news, that, they kind of do have a guy going forward. So I think the spring practice, you'll be able to probably see, whenever you see these guys practicing together, I think, some people will be able to kind of tell who's looking better at what spots and kind of who's going, first in these reps and stuff like that. But I wouldn't, roster wise, and just because also it is so new, I'm not sure how much we'll be getting before really game one, and then whenever they throw those first 11 out on the field. I think that's going to kind of be whenever we learn a lot, just because this roster is just so turned over.
Yeah. It's what did you take away from hearing Todd Meacham and excuse me?
I do that all the time.
No, that was definitely going to happen at least once here. But what did you take away from hearing Meacham and Grantham talk this past week here for the first time in front of the press and the media?
Yeah, it was interesting. Like if they were reading you the phone book, you would be able to tell who is the defensive coordinator and who is the offensive coordinator. I thought that was super fun. Grantham is more kind of like not coach speak in a bad way, but he's this is what we're trying to do, X, Y, and Z. Whereas Meacham, he was like likening the quarterback room to a peach field. And he's asked like what kind of players he likes, and he said big and fast. Like it was just like a little more like free flowing almost out of Meacham. So I thought that was really interesting. I thought it was all pretty super interesting. Grantham said they're going to be multiple on defense, which I think has been a little bit of a question. Went from Jim Knowles 4-2-5 to this Brian Nardo 3-3-5. It sounds like it's going to base at a 4-3, but they're going to be able to do a little bit more things out of that with Grantham. So I thought that was super interesting. He mentioned we talked a little bit before the pod that it was harder to kind of scheming for teams is harder in college than it is in the NFL. And what he meant by that is first of all tempo. He said whenever he was in the NFL and people would say, hey, they play fast, he'd look at them and go, you guys should go to college. They play really fast down there. And then also just like formation wise, there's a lot more different things that kind of college teams do than NFL teams. NFL teams, it's like it's a copycat league. That's kind of even the same for college, but it's the highest level of athlete. So you're doing the most efficient formations and the most efficient things like that. So everybody to an extent sort of does around the same stuff. The Lions got crazy this year, but so I think that's kind of more so what he's talking about there, where you'll get one team that does something completely different than the other team in college, and that's maybe a little bit more hard to scheme up for. So I thought all that was super interesting. I thought just Meacham in general isn't that interesting. Meacham got asked about Haas Haney, the quarterback transfer from TCU. Obviously, Meacham was at TCU as well. He didn't just name him the starter. I don't think that was expected at all. Very much said as an open competition. It's going to be the guy that can figure it all out and be the most efficient in the room. So I thought that was super interesting. And then him likening him to the peach field. I think he said something along the lines of you can when you go to a peach field, you can pick them up off the ground or you can take them off the tree. And with all these guys being so inexperienced, it's like taking them off the tree and you can kind of form it to how you want it. So I thought it was a nice thing because sort of I believe that was on Thursday that we met with them and Gundy and Weiberg. So it was almost an overload of information just because that was the first time that we talked to Gundy since the end of the season. So it was like, hey, that crazy few weeks, you got a whole new staff, you've got a whole new roster. There was a lot to get into with all those guys. So hopefully as that continues, we continue to have these media availabilities. We'll be able to get a little bit more in depth with some of the stuff.
Well, on that note here, did you take anything away from the first spring roster being released here? That update?
Yeah, not really. I thought it was interesting that they are down to the 105, at least on the roster. I thought that was interesting that they went ahead and, I think that's going to happen somewhat gradually for a lot of teams. For Oklahoma State to just say, hey, these are the 105 right now. Obviously, we mentioned that's going to change a little bit. I thought that was interesting. But other than that, it was a lot of like even the transfer guys, they were kind of listed at the same heights and weight that they were at their old school. There weren't any numbers. I'm a big numbers guy. There weren't numbers on the roster quite yet, so that was a little disappointing. But I don't think there was anything too major to take away. It was just kind of officially Oklahoma State saying, hey, all of these transfer guys that have committed are actually on the roster. That's actually a thing. So I don't think as far as roster updates go, it was nice to have it confirmed a lot of things, but there wasn't anything too new to really take out of it. There were a couple of guys that weren't on the team anymore, like Jalen Pope, Calvin Harvey, scholarship guys that were no longer with the team that also, to my knowledge, didn't enter the portal. So I'm not totally sure what went on there, but I imagine that's just some guys maybe got tired of playing football. Maybe they're looking for other opportunities. So that was like a little bit surprising, but none of those guys were necessarily like penciled in contributors next season. So I think it was all pretty standard, but just kind of nice to have the confirmation.
Yeah, it's good to know. I would also got to say I would be a big numbers guy too. I always want to get like the number of whatever guys playing that season. I think was standing out. I mean, last year of course there was not an Ollie Gordon jersey just floating around in the ether that you could just wear a 0 and just buy it at the store or anything like that. You definitely had to buy it through the NIL, which of course you should. But with that being said, I'm curious here to see what number each quarterback will be wearing, what number each running back will be wearing, et cetera, and just kind of will be wearing 25 because this is the year that Nike can put out the 25 jerseys and whatever, right? Too, right? So it'll be interesting there as well too. And Gundy did make a couple comments, of course, as he always does, saying, "Hey, this is his commitment here. I think is what you put out here is stronger every year." So I know you put that article out 3 days ago as well too. So what you kind of take away from his his press conference and him saying football's always on the mind, I wake up thinking football and that type of stuff?
Yeah, he mentioned whenever at his age he's got to go to the restroom in the middle of the night, and when he's walking to the restroom he's thinking about football, and he's walking back he's thinking about football. When he's in the shower he's thinking about football. And I think it was important for Oklahoma State, and given the messiness that was last year, given his comments about people not paying bills or whatever, and then obviously the end of the season and the drama with the Board of Regents meeting and stuff like that. I think it was important for him to say that, to say, hey, I'm committed to Oklahoma State. I think that's what Oklahoma State fans need to hear. I think for some of them, at least in my Twitter mentions, they'll believe it when they see it. I think a little bit more so. But I think it's certainly, I don't know what you really wanted him to say. I think it's certainly better than him, just like dodging that question. Something about, hey, what's your commitment level like? I think him saying that was obviously some good first steps. I think some people are gonna, they say that trust is what gained in drops and lost in buckets or whatever that saying is. So I think some people are gonna maybe need to see it a little bit more to believe it. But I think there was a certain section of the fan base that resonated with, that like, hey, he's still here, he's taking less money, all that stuff. So yeah, I think overall that was good for him to say. I think some people are still maybe going to need to be convinced a little bit more.
Yeah, the weirdest thing I think so far just from all of that is that it's December 2nd. It was announced that a new contract was going to be agreed upon basically, and it was going to be announced here. But official numbers still is have not been released. Anything at all to take away from that part of it? Just kind of that being odd, or just, hey, maybe Gundy wants to be a little more coy about how the salary has been reduced and buyouts been reduced or whatever, because technically speaking, he is a state employee, so that those numbers will come out at some point, right?
Yeah, I don't think it's any. I think if something had went awry, we'd have heard about it by now. Especially, I don't think they would have put him in a podium up in front of us if this contract wasn't getting signed and stuff like that. So I don't think so. I think sometimes it just takes a little bit of time to work through. These contracts are a ridiculous amount of pages. Sometimes there's multiple contracts that they're signing. So, the numbers it'll come out eventually because it's public record. So, I don't think there's anything to worry about, because I think if something were to have happened, I think we would have known about it by now.
Gotcha. All right. Well, on that as well here, the last time I had you on, we were talking about just transfers, just in and out, UCLA guys, other guys as well too. But did see that we got an Ole Miss transfer in here, as well as some other 2026 defensive prospects as well. Announced some OSU offers. Anything you're taking away from how that Grantham and Meacham are putting together kind of these new rosters, or just how the recruiting guys are how the recruits are looking maybe beyond not necessarily this year?
Yeah, I think they did a really good job in the portal. Especially given all this turnover that they've had to go to. They've had to almost completely rebuild a roster. Gundy mentioned making the rooms competitive, and I think that's a really key piece. They're Oklahoma State's rarely if ever going to be a school that goes out and gets like the top of the line portal guys. But if you can get guys that are going to be able to compete with the guys that you have now, and whoever comes out of that gets to play, I think that's certainly a great way to look at it for Oklahoma State. You mentioned Trip White, the Ole Miss linebacker. He hadn't played a ton, so I think that he'll have a little bit to prove there. But I think overall it's been pretty good. You mentioned the 2026 class. They've been offering a lot of guys over the last 2 weeks out of the 2026 class. Almost been kind of overload there as well. They offered a quarterback a couple of days ago that I haven't written anything about yet, so I don't know a ton off of quite yet. But they're certainly hard at work. They're into the 26 class. Obviously, the portal is closed for the most part now. I think some Ohio State and some Notre Dame kids were able to enter here recently because their season came to an end. And then I think it'll all be everything moving forward up until that spring window. Then maybe things get thrown into chaos again around the country.
That it sounds like, we're not that far off from football coming back. But then again, I have to remind myself it's still more than 6 months away here. It's not even February as we're recording this. I'm excited, I think, just about as anyone. But the next thing that comes up here for football wise here, of course, is there's NFL games going on today as Sundays we record this. But just wrote recently here, Trey Rucker accepts a Senior Bowl invite and several others. Are you anticipating Oklahoma State to have a couple guys get drafted more than just kind of Ollie, or maybe just him?
Yeah, I think Ollie's for sure. I think Colin Oliver will definitely go. I think Nick Martin will definitely go. I think Martin's going. I think Rucker's got a shot. I'm not exactly sure. I'll liken him somewhat to like is he a Colby Harville Peel type? That I don't think Colby got drafted, but I think he got picked up pretty quickly after that. So I think he's going to find his way into a camp. Trey Rucker is. But yeah, I think whenever Nick Martin gets in front of scouts and they see how fast he is, and then just sort of his mindset on things, he is a little undersized for a linebacker at the NFL level, but there's so much stuff that Nick Martin does well that I think whenever he gets in front of those type of scouts and they're able to get their hands on him, I think they're really going to like him. I think Ollie's obviously going to go, and then Colin Oliver I think is a shoe in to get picked at some point as well. So I'm trying to think of any other draft eligible guys. I think that might be it, but considering Oklahoma State went 3-9 this season, if they're able to get 3 or 4 guys drafted, I think it's a win.
Yeah, definitely. I forget how many we had drafted last year, but I feel like it wasn't that many. So
it might have been none. There's been a couple of years here where they haven't had any. I'd have to go back and look at that though.
And honestly, it might have been none because last year there were so many starters returning. So how many would even be have gone to go get drafted, right? So that's a great point as well. I'm curious though to see how Brendan Presley, of course, shakes out, which roster he ends up on, because I think no matter what, he's going to end up on a practice squad, if not get drafted there in very, very late round. Is there anything you're taking away from this last week's press conferences though with football that stands out? Anything more than the Peaches kind of quotes, or anything about Gundy saying, "Hey, I'll be hands off with Grantham and let him kind of be the head coach of defense," or anything else like that?
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. And Gundy's always sort of discussed that it being a little bit more hands off with the defensive coordinator, just because that's not a world that he's lived in. So I think he likes hiring guys that can kind of just like walk into that room and take it over. I think that's how Jim Knowles was. I'm not, Brian Nardo was so inexperienced that I'm not exactly sure how that relationship, worked. I thought it was interesting. We talked with Gundy because, the Meacham hire certainly made sense from a standpoint of, he played at Oklahoma State. He's coached at Oklahoma State under Gundy in the past. So you kind of saw the connection there. There wasn't a major connection with Grantham. You didn't, he's obviously had a ton of defensive coordinator experience, but there wasn't a connection with him at Oklahoma State. So we kind of asked how he got on Gundy's radar, and Gundy said that he came highly recommended. Gundy, he said as he was answering, he was like, "I'm trying to determine how many people I want to drag into this," because Gundy, said he went and asked around, and they were like, there were a lot of highly regarded defensive minds that pointed Grantham's direction. I think that there's a case to be made that Nick Saban might have been involved a little bit. Grantham's worked under Nick Saban a few different times. Gundy's always spoken obviously very highly about Nick Saban. How could you not? He's the GOAT of college football coaching. So I thought that was interesting. I think that was somewhat expected that Gundy probably asked around and people started pointing to Grantham, but just to kind of hear Gundy's stories about it and how highly recommended Grantham came, I thought was super interesting. Trying to think of anything else. Like I said, it was such overload of information. We had so much to talk about that almost nothing could go too far into depth. But that's something that stands out right now.
All right. Well, last kind of football question here as well is, since we talked last, the official coaching staff got announced, for 2025 here, and I know you wrote about that a couple weeks ago as well. Want to ask you, did you take anything away from the official coaching staff being hired and just kind of seeing all the names lay out? And it looks like, of course, we got Gundy returning, but also Sean Snyder, and then everyone else is new, from my understanding, right?
Yes, I believe so. They kept some of the support staff around that still made it. Gunnar Gundy joined the support staff. It looks like he'll be, working with the quarterbacks a little bit. There were a couple of names
that did make a couple of different of the Facebook posts and stuff too, or the social media sites of, hey, Gundy's returning. And it's like, wait, what? But yeah, that was a good one for sure. I love that.
Yeah. I think Theron H, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I don't know that he was talked about too highly before, the official announcement he's going to coach the wide receivers. Greg Brown, who I believe was on the staff as an analyst last season, is moving over to safeties coach. Doug Meacham coaching inside receivers, I thought, was interesting because, he fielded a question about this, I believe, from Robert Allen, that he probably didn't have to coach a position. What made him sort of want to do that? And he just said, he's always coached a position. He just kind of likes, having a sort of home base within the offense. So he's going to be coaching inside receivers. But yeah, aside from that, not a ton stood out. Kind of just like the player roster, a little bit more confirmation than anything.
Yeah, no, it's awesome to see as well. And yeah, I've seen some videos of these guys talking already all over social media, so it's been great to see as well too. Well, I've got to pivot here to wrestling because it seems like wrestling here is just going sky high. We're talking about football rebuilding. We're talking about basketball, men's basketball, of course, not women's basketball rebuilding, because women's basketball is on the top, going up and up as well too. You're getting ranked and even winning after that. But what have you taken away here from wrestling so far this season? We had the win against Northern Iowa here this past Friday.
Yeah, it's been a super fun season. It's been, it's an exciting brand of wrestling. And then on top of that, they're really good. This Northern Iowa duel in particular was definitely the toughest that Oklahoma State's faced. They're both 9-0 going into it. It was at Northern Iowa. And then on top of that, Northern Iowa, like as far as, rankings go, is sort of a good matchup for Oklahoma State. They've got Parker Keckeisen at 184, who's like the one guy who can beat Dustin Plott right now. And then there were a bunch of, sort of toss-up matches at the beginning that were going Northern Iowa's way. Caleb Fish sort of turns the duel on its head. He was the number 12, 157-pounder going in. He beats the number 4 guy, Downey, from UNI, and that kind of flips the tides of the duel. They're able to win off that. They're going to wrestle Iowa State here. And before too long, Iowa State's having a little bit of a shaky part of their season right now. So I think that should go Oklahoma State's way. But yeah, it's just been super exciting. I'm not sure if this group has an individual national champion on it right now. I think, Dean Hamady, I think is super, super good. I think he's going to have a shot at that. But I think it's another, they finished 10th at NCAAs last year. I think anything, past 3rd this year would be like the sort of a disappointment. I think it's going to be, Penn State's apparently has like the best college wrestling team that's ever been assembled this year. So they're probably going to win it, running away again. But then, Oklahoma State can compete with Iowa, who they're going to have a duel with here before too long for that second spot. I think it's going to be a lot of fun and sort of a nice building block for year one under David Taylor. But it's been my favorite, sport to follow this point in the season, just because they're sort of moving around like rock stars. I think UNI had its highest attendance ever on Friday night whenever Oklahoma State came to town. The crowds in Gallagher-Iba have been, really something special this year. I think, they're trying to get at least 10,000 in for this last home duel against Missouri coming up. So, wrestling it's been super fun to follow. And as a guy who's not, a big wrestling guy, it's been a fun sport to kind of just dive into and live in for a little bit whenever, the football season stunk. And the men's basketball season has certainly had its ups and downs, I guess, to this point.
Yeah, we're recording this on January 26th here, and that's the same day of the wrestling match here. So depending on when I get this one out here, may have already know all the results here, or may just be learning them here as it's 4 p.m. Central Time here on Sundays when wrestle Iowa State. It looks like on ESPN too, which has got to be a cool deal.
Yeah, big boy ESPN. Obviously, it's hurt a little bit by the fact that these NFL games are going to be going on during it, and ESPN needs something. But I think this is like the first or the second duel that's like on ESPN proper. I think it's like the second duel to ever, be there. So I think it's an exciting time for the sport.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of Oklahoma State playing on Sunday, of course, we also are playing Texas Tech at Tech. And then of course the men's team basketball wise here too. Just want to be clear because the women's team I talked about much differently. But what so far have you been taking away from men's basketball? I know we had the win against Colorado, which, hey, watching a win at home is always a great deal. You'd figure you get more fans to the building. But then again, lives in Arizona. It was 4-point game and a half, but then again, it wasn't really that close after that. And Arizona's a really, really good team. I mean, Texas Tech's a good team. I mean, every team we play is good. But what if you take away from basketball so far this season and kind of expectations going forward?
Yeah, it's been, I don't know, it's to an extent, sort of all their games play out similarly, where they can compete for a little bit, but they can't, compete over the stretch of 40 minutes that they need to at this point. The Colorado game was obviously a big deal, not only, just getting a win, but also, remember the 10 aspects of that. I thought they played really well at the beginning of that Arizona game, and then they just could not get a stop. Arizona State was hitting a ton of shots. Arizona ends up scoring 92 points on them. I think this Tech team is really good, and I think it matches up pretty well with Oklahoma State, so I don't have super high expectations going into this game in Lubbock today. I don't know. There are stretches where you're like, okay, I see the vision. I like what's happening here. I think it's just sort of going to take time to get lots of style of guys, into the roster. He was obviously off to a late start, getting hired in April last year, in terms of the transfer portal. But there are stretches where you really like it, and then there are other stretches where you're like, hey, you got to get a stop. Can't be missing all these shots. Why can't nobody finish at the rim? There's certainly those elements to it. But I don't know. It's hard to be too tough on Lutz just because this is just started. This is year one. He got hired a little late in the cycle. But yeah, I think the guys are playing hard. It's just more of a matter of, competing for a consistent 40 minutes, which they haven't, through Big 12 play, been able to do consistently.
Yeah, the one thing I took away from that Colorado game was Connor Dow saw a lot of minutes, but he also saw a lot. He also just got called for like every single possible foul that could have ever happened. I mean, he just was racking up every foul, and I had not seen him play that many minutes yet. But it was good to see him get some playing time out there as one of the three guys we brought back from last year's team. I just cannot get over the fact that this is a whole new roster for Lutz. Basically, you got Keller, of course, you got Bryce Thompson, and then you got Connor Dow, and that's it. I mean, that's not even putting any cherries or roses on it. That is just literally just it. On baseball and softball, though, I saw the Big 12 preseason rankings have come out recently here. Baseball ranked preseason number 1, softball ranked preseason number 1. Now, that is with a caveat that, of course, no more OU and Texas in the Big 12. Of course, OU in softball was like the powerhouse of all powerhouses, 4 national championships in a row. So take it with what you may as a grain of salt. If Oklahoma State fans, I'm not trying to make any headlines here. It's like, hey, we're going to win it all in Big 12 because we probably should in softball because OU's no longer in the conference. But what you take away from either of those? Just Oklahoma State softball and baseball be ranked to finish first year in the Big 12.
Yeah, certainly sets up for an exciting springtime down near McElroy Street. I think softball is going to be really good. Texas Tech, I think, is going to be really good as well. They got a stud transfer pitcher coming from Stanford. Kanadi, I think is how you say her last name. I'm sorry, I should know it. But she was like the best player in the portal. And Tech was able to get her, and Tech's been pretty consistent. So I think that's going to be a fun series for Oklahoma State. I think that those two meeting will be super fun. But outside of that, yeah, I think Oklahoma State should be among the contenders for the Big 12, no doubt about it. They've got a ton of I think the preseason all conference list, I think Oklahoma State had like 6 of the 18 players on it. They've got like 3 preseason All-Americans. Nolan Schubert on the baseball side, preseason All-American. Sort of cool that he's back for another year at Oklahoma State. I think coming into his college career, maybe wouldn't expected him to be in college this long. But there's been some changes to the MLB draft and stuff like that. So I think him, and obviously, NIL's probably helping that a little bit as well. So yeah, I think both. Yeah, there's a ton new with baseball. I think the pitching staff has been pretty revamped. I think that's going to be something that Rob Walton's going to have to figure out which guys go where. But they've always been competitive. I think baseball, it stinks that baseball keeps getting to host a regional and then losing in that regional. But then that, whoever wins that regional more often than not goes to the World Series. So, I think that's Oklahoma State's been unlucky in certain aspects in that in baseball. But there's been a lot of guys who keep up nationally with the college baseball scene that think this really could be Oklahoma State's year to make a run to Omaha. And then softball it's just always good. I'm really excited to get back out to Cowgirl Stadium and watch Kenny Gajewski's team play.
Yeah, do you think there is going to be a new softball or baseball or I guess not a new baseball stadium, but a new softball stadium coming up here or anything like that?
I think that's the stadium that needs it the most. If you've been to Cowboys Stadium, it's a fun atmosphere. It's a sick atmosphere with what they've got, especially beyond the outfield fences going on. But that stadium needs to be redone, especially for a team that's been to 4 or 5 consecutive Women's College World Series. The issue is that now it's do you want to put money into a stadium or do you want to put money towards your roster? So that's sort of like the limbo that Oklahoma State maybe finds itself in at this point. But yeah, there's no team maybe in the country that deserves a new stadium more than Kenny Gajewski's crew. So we meet with him on Monday morning, Gajewski. So I'm sure stadium talk will get brought up a little bit. He's I believe a few years ago was talking about the importance of getting a stadium. I think maybe last year he was like, well, this NIL stuff is sort of maybe taking priority right now. So I'll be interested to see with the changes and with revenue sharing being a thing, sort of where he is on a stadium and those plans. But nobody deserves it more than that team, I don't think.
Well, you've referenced the revenue sharing part of it a couple times now too. How does all that work? Is that across the Big 12? Is that across like sport to sport? How does the revenue sharing work exactly here?
Yeah, so I believe it's somewhere in the 20 million area that a school gets, and then that school gets to decide, okay, how much of this goes to the football team, how much of this goes to so a lot of that 20 million is going to be used nationwide from schools for its football team. That's just going to have I'm sure North Carolina is going to probably spend handful in basketball. Kansas is probably going to spend maybe a bigger percentage on basketball than most schools. But kind of like we were talking at the beginning of this, football is the moneymaker. So that's the thing that you want to put your money into because that's going to make the rest of the sports healthy. So every school in the country has the ability to spend up to the 20-something million. Not everybody's school is going to do that. Toledo's not going to spend 20 million on revenue sharing, but that's the cap that schools can use. And then it's, from my understanding, kind of their decision on what percentages gets used to kind of where.
All right. Is this part of the judge decision that comes down to also determine the roster size, or is this just kind of like a revenue sharing deal that is just amongst you said across the nation here? So is that kind of just a new deal here with all the NIL money going in place?
Yeah, so this is all with the judge. And that I believe something in that maybe wasn't as solid here lately in some vote. But I think that's what everybody is imagining. So he's going to sign this thing, and it's going to trim roster sizes down. It's going to give this revenue sharing model. I think there's still going to be NIL on top of that, but this is just the money that schools can pay directly to their student athletes. And then there's going to be NIL on top of that. So like the rich schools are still going to, kind of find a way to make more, you spend more money. But this is all through that judge. And it's been a process that's been super confusing. It's hard to keep track of NIL versus rev sharing versus all this. But yeah, the rev sharing stuff is all through this judge, I believe.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, yeah, seems like there's a lot of just, it's as clear as mud right now, maybe is the best way to say it. I mean, it's just, there's a lot of different ways to put it, I'm assuming here. But when it all comes down to it, how do you think Oklahoma State shakes out wise when it comes down to NIL wise and money revenue sharing? I know all that just seems like it's such a hard deal to figure out. Are we really one of the teams that needs to up our ante, or are we one of the teams that's like, hey, you know what, we're kind of in stride with a couple others at the top of the conference when it comes to football?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that needs to continue to be. And I don't think Chad Weiberg would have sent out that mass email without Oklahoma State wanting to get out in front of this a little bit, wanting to make sure, hey, just so you guys understand, this is how the game is played right now. So, I just looking at, the transfer portal this year, Texas Tech, it looks like in terms of Big 12 schools has probably spent the most amount of money. So I don't think Oklahoma State is at the top of the Big 12 in that, but I think they're battling with in the average to above average of the Big 12. I think they're I think they're in there fighting. I don't think they're going to be at the top of it because, like we said, Texas Tech, all that oil money out in West Texas. Tech is a rabid fan base in a ton of sports. I mentioned Kanadi, the pitcher that they got. They've got a really good basketball team that they've spent a good amount of money on. So, I'm not sure that they're at the top. I think that's definitely Tech. But I think they're competing, on an average level basis with the rest of the Big 12. I think Oklahoma State's going to find a way to get that 20 million. to use the full allotment of it. And I imagine a big portion of that is going to be sectioned off to football. And I think a lot of the coaches of other sports understand that. There's a lot of coaches. I recall Mike Boynton saying it. I recall Kenny Gajewski saying it, that the football making money is good for the rest of the university. And that's the case at a lot of schools. So a lot of schools are going to focus, this portion to have a healthy football program and sort of have that trickle down to the rest of their sports.
All right. Well, what do you think this does though? Like, I mean, we're talking about, hey, we're just putting in more and more money into sports. It seems like either the money was already being put on there or it was just not. So one way or the other here, either we're just learning more of how the money's working or we're just learning how and more money can be influenced. But what do you think this does? Does this help increase Oklahoma State's transfer portal budget? Does this help increase just kind of the football budget? Like what areas of improvement could this mean for a team?
Yeah, I think for the most part, it makes things a little clear whenever it's not making it clear right now. But I think whenever the judge signs this and everybody's got it puts some parameters on things. Because, since the portal basically went full open season and since NIL became a thing, everybody's just sort of been flying by the seat of their pants. So I think them, having a judge sign a law, I think will give a lot of, it gives a lot of clarity to how things can be done. And I think it makes it a little bit more simple for, you're not having to, a lot of athletic programs and their collectives work pretty close with each other. But with the revenue sharing, that you don't need the collective that's coming straight from the school. I think the collectives are still going to stay around to some extent because, like I said, past the revenue sharing sum of money that people are able to use, they're going to try and get more money to people on top of that. I imagine a lot of schools. So if you're like Oklahoma State, you just want to be in the field that's competitive. You want to be using the full 20 or 22 or 25 or however much money that you can rev share. You want to be using that whole allotment and then sort of work from there.
Gotcha. Well, do you think in the future this helps maybe other sports as well? Like, could this help basketball, baseball? Just other sports just get, I don't want to say more players because this isn't really a transfer portal in soccer, right? But maybe it is. It seems like this is such a weird gray area that a judge has not yet enacted a law that will trim the roster sizes and do the money allotments, but already Oklahoma State is operating as if it has gone into law and stuff like that. Is just trying to figure out here kind of how all this works, but in a better way of, okay, cool, this is happening, so I should be able to expect some type of gain or decrease in future player performance.
Yeah, I think for the most part, as long as Oklahoma State can get to that number, I think it helps. And as long as they can use the full revenue share, I think that certainly helps. But it's really going to come down to, if they want to use, say it is 20 million, if they want to use 15 million on football alone, and the rest of the sports have to divvy up that 5 million, it's going to be interesting. There's going to be a lot of decisions made across the country of how is the best way to use this. Oklahoma State is good in a lot of different sports. David Taylor and his wrestling team, I imagine they're going to want to be competitive. They have that, the National Duels Invitational got announced last week. Big prize pool for it. That's going to be super important, I think, to programs to find other ways to generate revenue because, there's going to be a lot of wrestlers who want to come wrestle at Oklahoma State just because of David Taylor. But at the same time, I imagine they're going to have to be competitive within the wrestling world with the percentage that they use. So it's all super interesting. It's super, unclear, like I said, right now. But I think when this finally gets signed into law, things will become a little bit more clear, and teams aren't just guessing anymore. Gundy mentioned on Thursday that they're not even sure whenever they have to officially be down to 105, that there've been talks that it comes in June. There's been talks that it comes in July. There's been talks that as long as you're there by your first game, you'll be all right. So, yes, still everything's a little bit murky. But, I think everybody to a certain extent is kind of working as if this is going to happen and just kind of waiting for it to get signed.
Gotcha. Well, it seems like a bunch of stuff's up in the air, and without asking you two more political questions, I'm assuming anything can happen, right? This necessarily could not get signed, and we could have made these agreements to do this ahead of time during the roster size, but also have the guys back in if something happened another way, right? Like there's just so many different ways this could go.
Yeah, I would assume at this point that, I think, some things we get tinkered with here and there, but just with the way that everybody's sort of moving in this direction, I would assume that they've got some pretty firm confirmations that this is coming. It's just a matter of maybe some wording gets changed here, maybe some wording gets changed there, but it's all in the way.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, that sounds good. At least to have some type of future differences shown or known or whatever it may be. Well, basketball is later today. Wrestling's later today. I'm not going to ask you to make any predictions either way on either one of those, but I feel better about making a prediction for wrestling winning versus basketball. I'll say that way, at least men's wise, right? Yeah,
absolutely. I think, the wrestling will definitely win today, he says, as he knocks on wood. Basketball is going to be a little tougher. Texas Tech likes to slow the pace down a little bit. And it's pretty efficient on the offensive end. So going to be a tough playing in Lubbock, always a little crazy as is. So going to be a tough game for the Cowboys. But yeah, wrestling will, I believe, run away from Iowa State today.
All right. Well, what are you fired up for next on the Oklahoma State calendar as we kind of wrap this one up?
Yeah, definitely. Big 12 wrestling is always a fun event in Tulsa. If you're an Oklahoma State fan and haven't been there, it's, I would say get like all session tickets. They've got, the first few sessions, there's like 4 mats going on at once. There's always a big contingent, obviously, with it being in Tulsa, of Oklahoma State fans there. So that's always a lot of fun. Looking forward to that. Looking forward to the Iowa duel. It's in Iowa, but that'll be a monumentous occasion for David Taylor taking the Cowboys up to see probably their biggest rival at this point, because Oklahoma wrestling has not been up to the standard that it's set. So certainly looking forward to that. And then JCO's women are playing lights out. I was at the game where they beat TCU, number 9 team in the country. They almost instantly erased a 15-point deficit, in the second half to come back and win that game. So that was a lot of fun. They play a fun brand of style. They're putting up threes. Staley Hurd is maybe a legit All-American. She's only a sophomore. She is so good at basketball. So yeah, I think there's certainly fun. And then right around the corner is going to be, baseball and softball. And all of a sudden, Oklahoma State fans who sat through the doldrums that was football season, have sat through, a rough start to this men's basketball year. And it looks like it's going to probably be a rough finish to this men's basketball year. All of a sudden you've got a really good wrestling team. You got a really good women's basketball team. You got a really good softball team. You got a really good baseball team coming up. So, and that's not even to mention the tennis teams, who are always very good and probably don't get the love that they deserve. So, I think it's going to, make for a fun spring here at Oklahoma State, especially, given the doldrums that were, that first semester of the school year.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, Marshall, thanks so much as always here for joining on the latest episode of the CJ Tour podcast. If you're not already, got to go follow at Marshall Scott OK on X. I'm trying to say X more and more, as Twitter is. Yeah. I mean, the lingo is always going to be there.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It looks like it's not going away, unfortunately. It looks like we're not going back.
Yeah, no, I mean, you can see by the tagline down below and the ticker on the bottom. I mean, X in parentheses, Twitter is the one that's written out. You're not. So, I mean, clearly the millennial in me is still sticking out here. But Marshall, of course, thanks so much for joining. If you're not already, go to pistolsfiringblog.com. Check out Marshall's latest news and notes and updates here, as well as anything else that's been written on the website here from Kyle Cox for any of the great other writers there they have. And check out, of course, Pistols Firing podcast as well. I'm assuming you already listened to that one, though. If you're listening to this one, though, just got to say, because Carson Colby do a great job there. And recently, of course, had on Matt Boy himself here in the wrestling guy know-it-all. Basically. So thanks again, Marshall, here so much. And if you're not already, please follow at the CGA Tour on Twitter, Instagram, X, whatever I'm supposed to say, TikTok. We're everywhere. Spotify, iTunes, where else you can find the podcast, in case you just don't want to see my beautiful and annoying somewhat face here. And in case you're also kind of curious what Marshall looks like here, you saw it on YouTube. But
little fuzzy. Camera still sucks, but
hey, I heard another podcast talk about it too. Is there a chance next one we do is just a person, and I'll bring my camera here and we'll get it fired up here and get good to go. We'll figure it out. So hopefully I won't blow another electrical socket though, trying to get you to record in person, because last time doing that was fun. That was an exciting way to start it out. So Marshall is always here. Thanks so much for joining here. Love having you on. Really appreciate the time. And last thing I gotta say, Go Pokes!